In this video, John Twigo explains how to seize the data management opportunity.
I want to give a special thanks to Phil and to Commvault for giving me the opportunity to express a few thoughts that I have on this subject. It goes by a lot of names you may have heard of in the trade press and in conferences and maybe on webinars like this one. Software-defined data center is one that's come into vogue over the last few months. Prior to that, it was infrastructure as a service, and prior to that, it was just generically cloud computing. There are growing signs that we've moved beyond the rumination stage as enterprise products have begun to appear for server, network, and storage virtualization in the market. And these are coming from established vendors, and as so we can give them a little bit of maybe a closer look. Now, while the services themselves are not really that new, they are creating a dynamic, new distributed server, network, and storage topology. And in so doing, they're introducing new operational models that challenge legacy processes and technologies for activities such as data management, and data preservation, and protection. From where I'm sitting, we're more exposed than ever before to a data disaster, despite the claims that the high availability aspects of all this software-defined architecture are bolstering business continuity. Some folks are using clouds today to store remotely their backups or their archives, or in some cases, production data. Others are using the cloud in a more sort of a remote data center context, using it for remote application hosting for either production systems or for backup services that will only be accessed in the event of an emergency. And then there are variations on a theme. And of course, some of these are cloud can be applied to describe software-defined data centers themselves, in which case they're private clouds, or you might subscribe to a service in Amazon or an Azure from Microsoft, a public cloud service, or you might spread your workload between both in creating something called a hybrid cloud. And the whole thing kind of keys on one basic requirement. You have to have ubiquitous network access to whatever services you're using in the network, obviously. So the arrival of the internet and its robust capabilities is part of what's enabling this cloud infrastructure. We've been real lackadaisical in a lot of shops in doing this in an intelligent way over the years. If you're going to go through a sea change in the way you're managing and platforming your applications, then why not do something about data management at the same time? I mean, this is the logical place to do it. You'll have to answer all of these questions that are listed here and probably dozens and dozens more. Otherwise, you're not going to deliver the promised business value that you're telling management you're going to get from all this virtualization and cloudification. Now, of course, if you've ever watched any of these launches from NASA, and in keeping with my Brave New World kind of theme here, it helps to have a really smart ground crew in case anything goes awry. And Microsoft, of course, with its Hyper-V, its clustered storage spaces, Azure Cloud, you've got a lot of capabilities there and a lot of smart people over at Redmond. Commvault, of course, can complement this with a lot of development that they've done around their technology for data management, which they call Sympana. And I'm not a shill for Commvault. I just happen to use their product, and I happen to like it a lot. So I'm going to turn things over at this point to Phil Curran, who is responsible as Director of Product Marketing for the company to extol the virtues of his product. And Phil, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Really appreciate the intro. That was a great presentation. Lots of really great points, and honestly, a lot of good stuff that's sort of reinforcing some of the trends and the things we're seeing. One of the things John talked about several times is sort of this idea of these sort of unforeseen challenges in moving to this sort of brave new world, which I love that term, by the way, but that sort of new world of a cloud-centric or a software-defined, sort of pick your buzzword, pick your term for that sort of shared services delivery model that tends to be popping up, and that's something I love about John, is coming from that sort of skeptic's point of view of, hey, on the one hand, there's all this sort of goodness in moving to this sort of brave new world as we're talking about it. We get lots of goodness around cost containment. We get lots of goodness around agility of workloads and flexibility in our business models. And so this is where, really a smart approach that kind of tries to think about holistically, sort of across these different pools or these different silos of storage, that can really be a game changer that says, what if we kind of laid out on top of each of these islands or a set of common policies and processes that allowed us to configure, to provision, to retain the VMs, to retain the data, to protect and provide preservation services, to protect and provide compliance services, to provide archive services across all of these different pools and different silos. What if we provided the resource management and even the resource optimization and retirement and sort of those archival services associated with those as well? And then what if we actually started to think about, okay, to that point around, hey, to enable an agile business model, I really want some of that portability or that migration capability, both on-prem to off-prem, but then also across the different platforms, from a Hyper-V up into an Azure type of an approach is really a key one, or across. And doing it across across those multiple cloud and VM platforms. So what if you had a standard web interface, sort of like what you're seeing on the screenshot here, that is, web front end, supports across VMware, across Hyper-V, lets you extend into either AWS or an Azure cloud, and lets you give you a standardized template for provisioning VMs. But do it all in one standardized operation that kind of streamlines things and gives it. And then what if we attached role-based accesses to those resources and to those platforms, role-based access controls that gave you the ability to fine-tune, okay, who can configure and provision those VMs, and how can they do that? And what if we attached sort of provisioning and expiration dates and lifecycle policies to those, so that as you're going through this provisioning process, that we kind of at the point of creation allow you to attach those custodial or those janitorial services to those capabilities, right? The separate tool for VMware versus Hyper-V versus Azure, all those different configuration tools. If we give you a standardized user interface, lets you do things like take software snapshots, provide quick reverts, right? Power up, power down VMs, all of those types of things that you're used to doing in your VM platform. But now let's standardize it across an interface and give you some and do it in a simple way that lets you extend these types of controls out to application owners, VM owners, admins, and then provide the really robust reporting capabilities around, especially when we get into a multi-tenant environment, around things like chargeback, showback, as well as capacity planning, so that you've got a smart view into what's happening today, how you can charge that back in an operating model to the different business units that you may support, and then how could you plan for the future with capacity modeling. So what if we give you a policy-based approach that intelligently went out and identified and detected those potentially stale or idle VMs, powered them down, archive them off to cheap and deep storage, where you can still retain them for future access, but you're not spending all that money on upfront production resources. Oh, and by the way, not spending all that expensive money on potentially high-dollar VMware licenses, things like this. And then, of course, getting you into the cloud, that's kind of the big mandate we're seeing from a lot of the C-suite, is how do we get into the cloud to start to recognize those agilities, those cost benefits, right? I think it makes sense to think about it from that perspective. Think about it if you look at a data-centric approach that not only manages, the data supporting VMs and the data supporting the workloads, but the fact that data is actually driving the configurations and the resources and the infrastructure. If you buy that argument, then a data-centric approach like the view that we're showing here from Commvault, that's built on a single software solution, not only hardware agnostic, but also VM and platform and cloud agnostic, is really starting to look like a compelling way to kind of help you get a handle on managing the complexity and kind of unlocking the agility sort of promised of a cloud or a shared services, sort of a delivery model